The Arab American University of Palestine is the first private school, in Palestine. It is run totally by, Palestinian private fund. We have two campuses. One in Jenin, where I stay, in the north of West Bank, and the other is in Ramallah, in the center of West Bank, very much close to, to Jerusalem. In both campuses, we have around, 12,000, students in both campuses. In Ramallah, we teach mainly graduate programs, including, conflict resolution, intercultural communication, business administration, some medical, sciences. Our university is well known for its medical, specializations, especially, nursing, medicine, and dentistry. And what is unique, Stephen, about our school, 50%, I think, to some 50% of our students are coming from Israel itself, Palestinians who are holding Israeli citizenship. So around, more than 5,000 students are Palestinians holding Israeli citizenship. And because of that, I feel our campus is unique, because we are bringing students from different parts of Palestine, historic or mandatory Palestine. And this is, I think, good experience, especially if we want to understand the Palestinian student identity. And indeed, some of our students already did that, a Palestinian, identity among Palestinian students at the Arab American University of Palestine, who are coming from different parts of, of Palestine, from West Bank, from, Palestine 1948, or from Israel. Unfortunately, we don't have, Palestinians coming from Gaza, since Gaza Strip is under, direct siege. We have some Palestinians who are coming from the Gulf, their families are in the Gulf. So our campus is good when it comes to enriching identity, to studying, the current, youth identity, in that regard. One point that I want to make before I'll give the floor maybe to one or two of our students, to speak about the deal and its ramifications, for the Palestinians and for the Arab countries. I am teaching in the Arab American University since 2003. Before that, I taught at Birzeit University, an eminent Palestinian university near Ramallah, Birzeit. And, I have been teaching international relations and conflict resolution. And my area of study, originally and initially was American foreign policy in the Middle East. And I would like to mention to our, American friends, to Stephen and to his students that, it is hard to teach something about, the US in the Palestinian universities, especially if you want to take, a professional stand. You cannot be neutral. You cannot, teach whatever you feel. The US, support to Israel throughout, in the last 70, 80 years, to the different Israeli governments and Israeli policies, both Palestinian academia who are specialized in American, foreign policy in some kind of, of contradictions. We teach generally, utilizing soft tools. We cannot, take, strong, strong, political stand, whether, in favor or against. So generally, I start my classes with theoretical, introductions, theoretical paradigms, how the U.S. foreign policy, decision making is working, and the machinery, the machinery inside. But overall, it is not easy, to teach American studies in the Palestinian universities in more open and with open with open space. Still we are putting more efforts in this in this direction. Even with conflict resolution as a program, we have also another story, because to some extent, in the Palestinian academia and in the Palestinian intellectual, circle, conflict resolution is partially equal, to normalization. But still, we have started this program. We are suffering from different types of conflicts, between Fatah and Hamas, between, local municipalities, even between different cities, different regions. Our society is saturated, with conflicts, with differences. And I think this type of academic program is really promoting, not only peaceful solution of conflict and dispute, but no, it also encouraging people to speak out. It encouraging people, to communicate. It is a matter of communication and bringing, the conflicting groups, to negotiate and interact freely. When I come back to the deal of the century, Stephen and I already highlighted some points and some historical facts related to the deal of the century. And there is a consensus among Palestinians. It is totally, in favor of Israel, and there is a clear American, let us say, alignment with, with Israeli position. Even in some circles, even in some academic circles, from, even from research perspectives, we felt that, the team which is around, Donald Trump, including, Kushner, Greenblatt, and Friedman, in some positions, they were more Zionist than the Israeli themselves. so we felt, these facts, and because of that, we thought, this, a conservative approach and the new conservatism and the rise, of populism in the U.S. politics is really impacting American politics today. But I agree with you, it was also a, business-oriented deal. It was of advertisement. It was a matter of, business marketing, in that perspective. Now, when I come back, to the deal itself, and what was the initial, Palestinian, reaction to that, I would like to ask, Taqwa, to give us, a briefing, in this regard. If you are ready, Taqwa, please.
Yes, Dr. Ayman. I will talk about the position of Arab countries on the deal of the century, if you allowed me.
Okay.
Okay. Jordan is against annexation, the Jordan Valley, and there is fear that Jordan will become the alternative homeland. So they feared of this point, that Jordan become the alternative homeland for Palestinian. And Egypt is against the deal of the century, but it's necessary to point out that Egypt has many fears about America. The most important of which is the internal economic challenge and the challenge of the Renaissance dam أو سد النهضة دكتور إذا تعيدها وراي.
Okay. Yes.
The United Arab Emirates agreed to the deal of the century, and also Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf countries. And the normalization agreement between Israel and the Arab countries began with the Emirates.
Okay.
While Palestine,
Okay,
while Palestine, the government reject the deal of the century, though, the U.S. administration implement some sanction. The first is close the Palestinian Liberation Organization office in Washington, and then Trump moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, in addition to cutting the financial aid to Palestinian government and institution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Taqwa. I would like to ask Sophia also to shed more light on the Palestinian position. Since she is working in the Ministry of External Affairs, whatever you have, Sophia, in your mind, please, let us hear you.
The Palestinian position was a collective one, not only for the in terms of the government, but also the civil society, the people. Surprisingly, the whole Palestinian spectrum all agreed on something finally, which is the refusal of the deal of the century. Many measures were taken by President Mahmoud Abbas. First of all, he called for the reformation of the Palestinian home in terms of the division between the main political parties here. And he also called upon Arab countries to express their position in terms of this deal. And here we can speak about the joint statement of the Arab League, which called for the refusal and a joint stance on the deal, which is to refuse it and to not ignore all the peace references and all the agreements that were signed earlier by the two sides. He also did end the security organization between Palestine and Israel. And we have witnessed many positions coming from different parts or different parts of the Palestinian government, let me say, from the PLO, from the National Council, from the Executive Committee of the PLO, that all expressed the refusal of the deal. And from my personal opinion, I think that this refusal not only speaks of the Palestinian government, but it also reflects the Palestinian position in general. And here we're speaking about the people inside of the West Bank and Gaza and the refugees in the world who their right of return was not recognized by the deal. Until this moment, and with the change of the administration from Trump to Biden, we have not witnessed any change of the approach. We are waiting for further serious steps in the matter. There was the President Biden did not even put an envoy for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So there is a lot of opinions on this matter. Many people are still waiting for the stance of the new American administration in terms of the and the deal. We are waiting for a change. I mean, there are several steps that needs to be taken. Palestinians have hope, but we are also disappointed with the new administration. The embassy change in location is still going on. The consulate in Jerusalem was not opened. The PLO office in Washington is still closed. So I think that our refusal was put on the table. It was reflected on so many ways, but in return, this deal only reflects a unilateral agreement between Israel and the US, and it has not taken into consideration any of these positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sofam. Thank you, Sophia, for this intervention, and also thanks to Taqwa. Finally, I'll give also Walid a floor to to give some reflective notes before we move to our to our American students on the other part. Walid, اتفضل Walid. Yes.
We'll add that Trump administration is also seeking to benefit from intra-Arab divisions, while many Arab countries are distracted by the conflict with Iran, and some have shown themselves willing to work with Israel to comfort Tehran. Also that the administration hopes that Arab states will place inexorable pressure on Palestinians until they sit down to negotiate, having accepted the proposed plan as a starting point. These calculations may have been proven right by the presence of Emirati, Bahraini, and Omani ambassadors in Washington at the announcement ceremony, and by the Saudi and Egyptian response to the plan, which called for negotiation under US protection. So the timing of the announcement is also important. That's all I have to.
Yes, thank you, Walid. I think the deal had direct implications, Maram, for Jerusalem, the refugees, and the status of Palestine as an independent as independent state, as well as for Jerusalem. As Trump already signed a kind of recognition to take off Jerusalem from the table, and the U.S. administration already moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. As if he's saying, no more negotiation, no more mediation by the U.S. And it is our part now to take, final, decisive positions. What are the implications of the deal for the refugees, for settlements and other tricky issues? I would like to ask Maram. مرام تفضل اعطينا شويه تعقيبات فيما يتعلق بالها تفضلي.
Okay, Doctor. About refugees, the deal of the century have not been addressed, but compensation and management mechanism will be established by the international community. About Jerusalem, the eastern neighborhood, with the exception of the old city, will be a part of Israeli Jerusalem and Abu Dis as a capital for Palestine. Last point, as for Palestinian sovereignty, the deal of the century proposed granting the Palestinian limited sovereignty over half of the West Bank and the entire Gaza Strip. I think we find that deal of the century eliminated the two-state solution and overtook international legitimacy.
Okay. Thank you, Maram. Amanda, I don't know if you want to add some points from your own, analytical, perspective, especially the Palestinian reaction and the Arab, the reaction by other Arab countries. تفضلي, Amanda.
Okay, thank you. Well, for me, I wanted to talk about the differences between Trump and Biden. As you know, Biden, let's say, he started in this year. So the only thing that we know that he donated money to start and restart the peace building. His plan was to rebuild and support the political contacts with the Palestinians to facilitate a two-state solution. However, I want to go back to Donald Trump. Speaking about Donald Trump, okay, I will start first in 2019, and then go back 2018, and then 17. And a clear declaration for Trump was in 2019, where he said that I am the history's most pro-Israel US president. And also Netanyahu called him a dear friend for Israel. The former president, he seized all the financial aid for Palestinians in 2018. He supported Netanyahu's government, and also he did not see that the settlements are illegal. And also this was a great point where we see that Donald Trump is not, he does not want peace building, or he does not want a solution. And as we know that he blamed Palestinians for not negotiating, and this is why he seized the financial aids. However, the American president, I'm sorry, not the American, when he was the American president, he promised, and he did move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. As we know, this, I think in 1995, they promised that Tel Aviv by 1999, it will be moved. The embassy, sorry, it will be moved to Jerusalem, but no one president signed, because the president signed a waiver for national security considerations. However, Trump in 2017 recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the embassy from Tel Aviv. This move was controversial because Jerusalem was supposed to be an issue to be negotiated with the Palestinians. And he, as I mentioned, rejected Obama's claim that Israeli settlements in the West Bank are illegal. And moving also to صفقة القرن. بديش الدكتور أفوت كتير. I don't want to talk more about the deal of the century. I will just stop here. Thank you.
Okay, Amanda, thank you. Lastly, I would like to hear from Baha. Baha, do you want to add some other, commentaries, some critical points, or some, remarks from you, Baha? تفضل.
Yes, I want to talk about the European role in this deal of the century. As I see, they have a limited rule, and I think they should have more involvement in this century, in this deal, because as we know, the United Nations and the Europeans have a very big role to play in this Middle East area.
I will give the floor, to be honest and fair, give the floor to Stephen to interact with his students if they have any note, any comment, or any clarifications. Please, Stephen.
Thank you, Ayman, and thank you to your students for what were really very insightful presentations about different aspects of the deal of the century and U.S. policy toward Palestine. I want to note for my students how rare it is, as I've said, to hear this conversation with a group of Palestinian students in the West Bank, but also how significant it is that their university is an Arab American university. You should take into consideration what Professor Yusuf said about the difficulty, the position he's in as a professor. It's almost as though he has to play the role of ambassador and diplomat, right? To be a professor at an American university. Imagine, on the West Bank. I assume that the Arab American University was founded by a group of Arab American professors within the United States. In other words, probably mainly Palestinian Arabs that were interested in setting up this Arab American university back on the West Bank. And so you have this connection between our country, the United States, and this university within Palestine, but it's a connection through Arab American interests. In other words, faculty in the United States that have an interest in this issue in the Palestinian territory. You need to understand the position that Professor Yusuf is in, as he commented about how difficult it is to be a professor there, because for obvious reasons, the position of the American government and association with America is not popular within the Palestinian community. And so, particularly over the last 2 decades. And so it presents certain hurdles for a professor like Professor Yusuf to teach a topic like this, conflict resolution, and the conflict between Israeli and Palestinian interests. I don't think my students have that kind of sophisticated appreciation and understanding for how these issues play out for you on the West Bank. I would want them to note just how difficult it is in terms of personal transportation. For instance, the way Palestinians are able to move around the West Bank due to American policy of prioritizing the interests of Israel and prioritizing the interests of Israeli security. Obviously, this is a population, their grandparents and great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents have connection to that land, but that Palestinian Arab identity within the territory of Palestine is increasingly restricted and excluded in terms of its movement around the Palestinian territories. So I have a feeling that my students are going to be interested in those types of questions with your students, of what it's like to live as a Palestinian student in the West Bank. I do want to say on this point, and then I will encourage my students to speak up. It may be that some of them aren't prepared to speak up, but I hope that a good number of you will. But I want to say how significant this is that Professor Youssef leads a graduate studies program on the West Bank in conflict resolution at a university that has affiliation with America. And my students are primarily undergraduate students. I have to say, some of them are interested in this topic of conflict resolution. But I would want to encourage my students to think how fascinating it would be to go study at the Arab American University in Palestine on the West Bank, pursue a master's degree, or maybe pursue a doctorate degree within the faculty of Professor Ayman Youssef, and the facilities they have there to instruct about this issue that is, of course, of great importance in American foreign policy. With that in mind, let me ask, my two more senior students, Renelle and Alex, I hope that you will take the lead, but I do want to encourage Gabriel and Clayton and Todd, if you have anything to ask or to comment on, please feel free to raise any points that you would like.
Professor Day, well, thank you. One important thing that I really want to say, and I paid close attention to comments made by Ms. Amanda, and I agree upon what she said. One of the most important things that I really want to say is that if we go back, since President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, so they technically agreed upon moving the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but it never occurred. So the US consistently refused to recognize Jerusalem, as Israel capital, believing that a formal announcement could spark violence, and it would fatally undermine the US position as an honest broker between Israelis and Palestinians. So, which means this is not something since 1995. So President Clinton stated that, well, he would move forward with such action, but he never did. President Bush stated, well, I think he was even against that, stated, well, President Clinton did not probably do what he promised that he would do as far as moving, the US Embassy, and even President Obama. So this is something that we can see that never happened in the past. And as Professor Day, had mentioned, well, with President Trump, it is all about business deals. It's all about, promoting himself. That's what it's all about. But to me, I think having, I would say, having Israel, occupying that piece of land, to me, that's my personal point of view. It is an occupation. It is an occupation. And as far as what would the new administration will do, what will be, the stance in reference to what's going on now, in the conflict between the two countries, it is kind of early to, to decide or to know exactly what's going to happen. But one of the things that I have seen, as I stated in the past, the USA constantly refused to do so, knowing, it is a huge danger. What are the consequences, in a sense of moving, which, in a sense, President Trump did in May 2018. Now, if I do have a question that I would like to ask, and then I always think about it, because I believe that the issue, it's about technically two solutions, having what they call this two-state solution or one-state solution. But if the two-state solution that would establish Palestine as an independent state in Gaza and most of the West Bank, leaving the West to Israel, is established in theory. Because in theory, this is something I think, both parties, agree upon. why the two states are still deeply divided to make it work in practice. So in theory, it seems like both parties agree, but practically, it has not happened as of yet. Why is that? If there's a question that I would like to ask, that's probably what I would be clarifying. I would be clarifying on.
Okay, let me, before Eamon and your students respond, let me see if I can get one other student to ask questions, and maybe you all can include in your replies a number of points. Is Alex, are you still there? Alex, I know you were wondering, whether this will be a two-way set of issues that American students can ask questions. Please raise any points of concern you may have or questions. And as I said, Gabriel and Clayton, Todd, if you're prepared, I would appreciate it if you would do so as well.
Yeah, okay. I guess I have a quick question: is how I guess helpful is that? I guess some of the students over here also have that Israeli citizenship, so that's got to help out in some ways, right? In terms of travel. But then to my more main point, since we're talking about the accords, we've been talking about Trump and whatnot, but I mean, that era is over. So we've moved into this new presidency with Biden, and from the looks of it, it doesn't look like he's going to change much. I mean, he's going back to the more transparent kind of policy of, maybe wanting an open dialogue, but as far as actions go, so far it seems like the American position of supporting the Israeli government is going to stand. And unfortunate as that is, I think it's just a matter of fact that with increasing pressures in the area from Iran, Turkey, and Russia, like the U.S. just has to double down on its allies in the region. It's already established allies. And so knowing that, does that affect how does that affect you guys and how you look at the accords going forward?
Okay. Yeah, I think, Alex, this is a really good point about the wider regional geostrategy. And obviously, Palestinian students and you, Professor Ayman Youssef, over the last years have seen the region around you just erupt in violence and conflict. And this is a concern. It's an enduring concern, of course, for Palestinians who in history were part of this identity of Syrians and part of the identity of other neighboring Arab people in the region. I do want to say, in reply to Ronel's comment about the issue of the movement of the embassy, it is important to note that what happened in 1995 was a congressional piece of legislation. It wasn't an executive position. So you need to understand, Ronel, and obviously as Americans, we all know that we live in a country that has divided government. We have two branches of government. Typically, under the Constitution, foreign policy matters are a concern of the executive branch. It doesn't have to be that way. Actually, there are some foreign policy powers that are divided by Constitution, but certainly by practice, it tends to be that the executive sets foreign policy, particularly on matters of recognition of government. This is not something that the Congress does. So we need to understand that what happened back in 1995 was the politics of the Congress trying to push a piece of legislation that would put Clinton into a difficult spot. And obviously it had a lot to do with the politics of that era of the Oslo Peace Accords. And you need to understand it in those terms, Ronel. It's not like what happened in 1995 had to be implemented. think about the way the Congress and the White House frequently battle over these kinds of issues. And that's what happened. It wasn't like that was something that had to be implemented. It had to be on the books. Now, obviously, for political reasons, presidents tended to say that they supported that idea. And that's because of the politics within the United States, that it's very difficult to run for political office, particularly to be president in the White House, and to not support Israel, right? Or not to say that you stand strongly with Israel. I think the key point on this, what happened under the Trump administration, was that Trump was that president who came in as an unabashed supporter of Israel. And it was like he was, going to dare to do, what every other president wasn't committed to doing. And you're correct, Ronell, it went back to the Clinton administration. But again, it had to do with the unique politics of Trump. I have to say that I think you're right that the Biden administration and future American administrations are unlikely to go back on that because of the way that it would play within American politics. But I also want to say that I've heard discussions in Washington, D.C., that if that's true, then the United States might consider reviving what used to be defined as its consulate in East Jerusalem. And this, of course, was a building, I think, was it on right outside Damascus Gate, I think, as you go up, is it Nablus Road? In other words, very central to East Jerusalem, that would be, again, from the American position, that the status of Jerusalem should remain part of negotiations, that there should be a way for the United States to signify that it also recognizes Palestinian ownership, in a way, of the city of Jerusalem, and that there might be some future change in status for that, what used to be a consulate in East Jerusalem. Obviously, Professor Ayman Youssef, you and your students would know better. I don't even know whether that building is open any longer or whether that was closed down once this was a new building constructed specifically to be the American embassy in Jerusalem. But please respond to both of sets of issues. Again, the more geostrategic concerns that Alex raised, more specific concerns about the embassy that Ronell raised. But I think also of interest is the point that Alex, you made, that perhaps some of these students online with us are Palestinian students that carry Israeli identity cards. I don't know if that's true, but you made the obvious point. Of course, that would mean, and you, Professor Youssef, you and your students can speak to this more in depth, whether that indeed makes it much more easy for a Palestinian student with Israeli identity cards or Israeli citizenship to move around. So I see those three sets of issues that would be interesting to hear your responses.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Professor. Professor Dave, for this, and thank you for your students as well, Renee, Alex, and for others. Listening also is an art by itself, and we are pleased and happy that we have an American audience, with us in this online session. One of our students, Baha Dawes, is his father is from West Bank and his mother from Jerusalem. بهاء بتوقع انت معك هوية إسرائيلية ولا لا بهاء؟
أنا هوية مقدسية مش إسرائيلية.
Yes, he is holding Jerusalemite ID where he can move from one place to another. But before I give my reaction, Stephen, to your comments and to the comments by your students, I don't know if maybe Sophia can react to some of these points, and if I can listen to some other students. I do not. اتفضل Sophia.
I want to speak in terms of Palestinians with not only the Israeli citizenship, but also people who live in Jerusalem. It's very important to be aware that Palestinians, wherever they are, they're not treated as first-class citizens. I mean, in Israel, we are treated as maybe fifth-class citizens after Arab Jews, after Christians, after all sorts of people who live inside of Israel. The fact that they can move from place to another does not really reflect that they are given their entire freedom as Palestinians that hold Israeli citizenship. There are so many ways that are practiced against them in terms of the freedom of speech, in terms of the places that are completely that they are completely not taken care of by the government that they were forced or they lived under, which is the Israeli government. And sorry, yeah.
Yes, please, اتفضل. Yes, please, go on.
Okay. So it's very important to know that moving from one place to another, from Israel or from the occupied territories, let me say, inside to Palestine, you have to move through checkpoints, you have to move through ways that are only for Palestinians that Israelis do not dare or do not are not allowed to go through. Yes, there is a movement for the Palestinians with the Israeli citizenship from and inside and outside of the country, but they face a lot of problems in terms of the checkpoints, in terms of their freedom of expression, their freedom of movement. And I want to speak also about what Renel mentioned earlier, which is the two-state solution. I'm sorry about, I'm gonna switch from one subject to another, but I'm trying to like give an overview of my opinion on the topics that were discussed. Yeah.
Sophia, would you mind if I ask a follow-up though to the first issue?
Yes, sure.
Because what I in particular was interested in knowing from you and other students this morning, in light of what I've seen just in the last few days with this appearance of an Israeli mob, moving through Jerusalem and attacking cities. It wasn't as much the official sort of police checkpoints. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw in one video, somebody posted online saying that this group of Israelis was going up to people they suspected of being Arab and asking them, to comment on something to try to pick out their accent. And the comments that I saw, and again, I don't know the accuracy of this because it is so recent, just in the last few days, but I did see people putting videos up to this effect, that they would then attack people in Jerusalem if they appeared to be a Palestinian. In other words, if they could note in their accent some sort of Arabic. And, I don't follow social media that frequently, but I do have accounts where I follow, because I'm a professor that teaches about the Middle East, I follow many things that go on in Palestinian, in Syria and Iraq. The main country I research is Yemen. So I rely upon these kinds of videos and reports to get a sense of what's happening on the ground. But this was so stunning to me. And the reporting that I saw was that it was like a kind of pogrom, that there were these right-wing groups of Israelis that were really looking to pick out somebody with a Palestinian Arab identity and attack them. I mean, you and your friends today, I'm assuming that what I saw on videos is true. I mean, would you fear if you had to travel in to Jerusalem, you had to travel between cities? Is it that level of fear today that you might be attacked for being Palestinian Arab?
What's interesting about the attacks, I mean, the recent ones in Jerusalem, is that they're systemic. I mean, there are WhatsApp groups between Israeli youth who are right-winged, or they are extremists who talk about how they're going to attack the Palestinians who are inside of Jerusalem in these holy days, as we call them, because, you know, we are now in Ramadan, which is a very special month for Palestinians, for the Palestinian community, either for Muslims and Christians, because we all celebrate it together here. Many people go to Jerusalem to pray, and they go to Al-Aqsa, they try to get permits, or they try to go there maybe illegally only to pray there. So there are a lot of groups, especially on social media, that call upon people to attack this group of youth in Jerusalem. I think that what's also interesting is that these people get the protection of the Israeli police. Some settlers go on the roads, some Israeli extremists go on Jerusalem streets and attack others, where police officers are standing in there and simply looking at them. So this for sure increases our fear. This for sure makes us fear going. For me personally, my family has a problem for me to move alone from one city to another in Palestine, because there are a lot of attacks, not only from Israelis or soldiers on the checkpoints, but also from settlers in the streets that are provided by extreme protection by the police. So yes, not only it exerts fear, but also it exerts our freedom of moving from one place to another, not only freely, but without feeling frightened, or not without feeling the danger of having people to attack us on the way. And also here, if you go on the news, and I really, really invite our fellow students, American students, to look for the news that do not only reflect the Israeli point of view, because there are a lot of Palestinians, they were shot and they were killed only because they were walking from one city to another. And they were claimed to have knives and to have guns and so on. But after looking closely into these incidents, we have seen that people were killed only because they're Palestinians. So yes, there is fear, and it's very unfortunate that it is a growing fear. There is no stop to these attacks. They were encouraged, and they were, let me say, pink-washed by the Israeli government.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're confirming what I've seen in videos over the last couple of days.
Yes.
What you said at the end, that it's increasing. So I take it that this level of kind of out in the open attacks by, as you described it, social media groups that are activated, but they have the protection of police. This is really something new, maybe, that it's more extreme than it's been in the past.
Yes,
I would
definitely.
like to add. I'm sorry.
Yes, I think, let us encourage maybe, yes, Amanda and other students, if they want to express something, these questions are very much vital, very much crucial. So please, Amanda, تفضلي. Then we can hear maybe from Taqwa and Walid and Maram. تفضلي يا Amanda.
Okay, thank you. For this actions, for the settlers, I'm sorry, for the settlers' attacks on Palestinians. What you watched on TV or social media is true in Jerusalem. And as Sophia said, the Israeli, soldiers, they protect the settlers, and it is okay for settlers to hold guns. As an example, I want to say about moving from city to city. First, let me end for Jerusalem. This kind of actions, they go back and they move. I mean, sometimes this kind of actions, they go high and we see it every day, and sometimes maybe every 2, 3, 4 months. So this is not new. It is always there. But as I said, it is going stronger in the past few days. However, I would like to say an example. When I go to Aboud, it is a village near Ramallah. But when we want to go there, we pass C areas. As you know, there are A, B, and C areas. A are for Palestinians, and C is for settlements and for walls and also for the roads between settlements and between cities. These areas are dangerous. What I want to say is when I go to that village, there is a settlement where there is like كيف نقدر نحكي الدوار دكتور؟ دوار
road circle.
هالقد سهلة عم بدور على مصطلح أنا أوكي where there is a road circle and many Palestinians were killed on that road circle because an Israeli soldier always stand on the door of the settlement where let me say a Palestinian, he was rushing on a wedding, and the soldier, he thought, I don't want that he thought, I don't want to say that he thought, he did not think that he wanted to come to the settlement or run over a soldier. The guy did not want to do this, but the soldier claimed that that this Palestinian wanted to run over him. So they shot him dead. And also another man where there was something wrong with his wheel. So he did not control his car, and also they killed him, they shot him. But sorry, the cameras showed that these Palestinians, they didn't want to run over the soldiers because especially that this soldier was not on the road. He was behind a wall. So logically, he can't run over anyone. So every time I go to that village, whoever is driving, I tell them, please slow down because this road circle is very dangerous, and the soldier there is waiting for any opportunity to shoot a Palestinian. Thank you.
اوكي يس تقوى وليد مرام، مين ممكن تضيف بهاء؟
أنا دكتور.
تفضل يا مرام.
I want to talk about going to Jerusalem. Before 8 years, my son was in a coma. He was very tired. He was 2 years and a half in that time. We take him to the hospital in Ramallah. Then they told us to take him to Al Maqasid Hospital in Jerusalem. When we talked to a DCO office here in Ramallah, they told us that it is not that his father and I am not allowed to go to Jerusalem because his father was wanted. I can't leave my son at that time, and I go with him in the ambulance car. When we reach the checkpoint, which called the Kalandia, the Israeli soldier come and told me to leave the ambulance car, to leave my son, go to the hospital alone. I told him that I can't leave my son. I can't leave him to go to the hospital alone. There is no one in the hospital to take care for him. He hit me with his hands, with his leg. He tried to shoot me with his gun. He was talking with me in a loud voice. Want to, if you not leave the ambulance car, I will kill you. I told him, kill me, but I can't leave my son. This is one of the ways which Israeli soldier in the checkpoints يعني بيتعاملوا معنا.
Treating the Palestinians, yes.
Treat the Palestinians. Another point, I am from Nablus. I married in Ramallah. When I go to visit my family, mother and father, the settler along the road from Ramallah to Nablus. They they were we found him on the street, raise their weapons. شو بدي اقول كمان؟
بالعربي شو
tried هو
Okay.
يكسر السيارات بس مش جايه لي على بالي.
Yes, and throwing stones at their cars and breaking their cars. Yes.
With the protect of the Israeli soldier and the police, the Israeli police.
Yes.
That
Yes.
we find it all around the road from Ramallah to Nablus. Thanks, Doctor.
Okay, thank you, Maram. Yes, Walid, do you want to add something, Walid? Then Maram, then Taqwa.
Well, let me say.
Please, Stephen. بعدين بس ما تفضل. Yes, please, Stephen.
Yeah, I want to reply to Maram, to the story that you told, Maram. It's a very personal and very moving story. So I want you to know that we're paying attention to this issue and we're concerned about these issues. You know, this is a daily occurrence for you and other Palestinians in your lives on the West Bank. And I appreciate your willingness to share that story with us, Maram. I hope that you and your family are well and that your son recovered from the illness that you described.
Thanks, Professor. My son, thanks God, is very good now. But I can't, this story, I can't forget it. Yes,
yeah.
it is.
No, I understand
very
how
hard.
difficult it must be. And Professor Youssef, I think this is what most American students don't understand about the Israeli-Palestinian issue is the way it tends to be presented in the United States. It's, of course, that the Palestinians are the ones causing problems for the Israelis. It's just the exact opposite of what the situation is on the ground. Obviously, you know, there are Israelis that end up, Israeli Jews, I mean, who end up being harmed in violence. But those are the rarer occasions. I want students, my students, to know. I'm sure listening to Palestinians, you all have stories that you could tell along these lines. And here in the United States, in American media coverage of the problem between Israel and Palestine, those issues tend not to get told. They tend not to be prioritized. You know, obviously, if they were reported and prioritized in the way that American media reports whenever there is an attack where an Israeli Jewish citizen is harmed or injured, it's on the front page. You know, it's in the headlines. If the American media truly covered the issue fairly, it would be a daily event in the United States. I mean, you Palestinian Arab professors and students on the West Bank, you know that happens, as you're saying, you know, this is really a daily event. But I want you to know, I was struck, I'm obviously aware that there's been a tendency for the Israeli police and the Israeli army to provide cover for settlers that carry out this kind of attack. But I was very alarmed by the videos I saw over the last 2 days. I mean, to me, that showed truly that it's reached a very different level where Israeli Jewish citizens, obviously of that more right-wing persuasion, feel that it's their right simply to attack non-Jewish citizens living on the land. I mean, I heard them making statements that truly sounded like pogrom actions where they felt they were entitled to simply push anyone who's not Jewish off the land. We hope that doesn't happen. You know, we recognize what is the significance of the Holy Land, the land that is Palestine, Israel, that it is a land of all people, that it's a land of all of the three Abrahamic religions, and there should be recognition that there needs to be multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural acceptance of right of belonging on the land there. I'd like to go back to Sophia, if we could hear Sophia. I know you were prepared to make a comment about, I think you were going to comment, was it on the embassy issue or the, I know there was more of a policy concern, because I interrupted you and asked if I could reply to what you said first.
No, it's fine, Professor. I was going to talk about the two-state solutions because Rinal, I don't know if I heard it right. He was saying that even that this two sides are doing agreements since forever, and we're trying to go back to negotiations and so on, but nothing is really happening on the ground. I think that was your comment, right, Rinal?
Yes, that was it. Yes.
From my own perspective, I think that we should also think about the will of the two sides to go into negotiations and to reach a peace agreement between the two sides. What we're seeing on the ground from the Israeli side as a Palestinian is that there is no will. We're speaking here not only about the government, but from the people themselves, from the settlers, from the people, from the extremist groups that we're facing every single day. The political ambitions of the Israeli government does not really match their political face, let me say, in front of the world. I think that the religious beliefs and the religious view of the whole conflict is very problematic to us. The fact that they believe that Israel should be from the land to from the river to the land and so on, it has a it's a great implication. It reflects the will of the people and the government that merely reflects the people's view in the first place. So it's very important to watch what's going on day by day, to see what is happening inside the Israeli cabinet, to see the American also intervention or a stance in this issue that we all know that it is biased to Israel, but being biased to Israel also reflects that there is no will to reach a peace agreement between Palestinians and Israelis. The occupation is the cheapest occupation in the world. Here, the Palestinian government is responsible for the Palestinian people, but if you look at it from far away, we can see that there is no control or sovereignty for the Palestinian government itself on the land. So this is a cheap occupation, and the ongoing occupation is beneficial to Israel from my point of view. They do not really care about the world or the peace agreements or the negotiations. All they care about is to take more lands, is to give more lands for the settlers and the people who are serving the Israel in terms of the economy, in terms of the development. We are here, I don't want to say the victims, but also a tool for Israel to create the country that they look forward to create. And unfortunately, they're getting help from everywhere, not only from the world, from the EU, from also, unfortunately, from the Arab countries and the recent moves that are going on, from the normalization agreements that are happening. So there are a lot of aspects that we need to go through when we look at the agreement or the peace process, let me say, between the both sides.
Okay, Sophia, thank you, Sophia. Dr. Steven, I think, Taqwa wants to add something, in this point. Yes, Taqwa, please.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the nation-state law for the Jews, which approved in 2018 by Israeli government. And one of the most important thing about this law that is indicate that immigration that leads to direct citizenship, it's for Jews only. And also other articles which make Israel as an apartheid state and put Palestinian who holds Israeli ID in dangerous situation. And this appears that Israeli government is a discrimination on the basis of religion and race, both of them. Thank you.
I think this point that Taqwa makes is a very important point, because obviously changing in a formal way the wording, the text of Israeli law to make clear what many suspected. And I have to say this, goes back to World War I, and the British commitment, of course, that was made to the Zionist movement in the famous Balfour Declaration, that it was always suspected that that was the purpose of Zionism, was to prioritize the Jewish identity, the Jewish religion, the Jewish ethnic identity. And until that 2018 law, Taqwa, it wasn't made explicit, as everyone always surmised that was the purpose. And if you go back and study that issue from the time of the Balfour Declaration in World War I, even the wording of the Balfour Declaration said, it's recognized that this is what the Zionist leadership is saying it seeks to achieve. But even the British authority at that time said that it can't be done in a way that, I think the word was, that would jeopardize or compromise, I think, the cultural, religious, social rights of other non-Jewish citizens living on the land. And obviously that's the danger, right? Was defining political identity along religious lines. And I take your point, Taqwa, that now that it's formal, it's official, it does jeopardize anyone carrying an identity card that doesn't make clear that they are a person of either Jewish, religious, or ethnic background. Now, it shouldn't, it doesn't, it's not like it has to, but I think the risk is, like these pogrom activities over the last few days indicate, this, that it puts at risk the life of anybody who is not Jewish. And so I take your point, Taqwa, that this is something very important. And again, this was one of the changes that came about through the Trump administration, that his White House was willing to enable the American ambassador to Israel to say, yeah, let's go ahead and do this. Let's make it out in the front. This is a religious national movement on the ground, that it's fully a Jewish state. To me, it's incomprehensible. And I have to say that as a professor who began looking at this issue back in the late 1970s and the 1980s, when I remember that wasn't the Zionist position. Zionist leaders tended to bend over backward to say that wasn't the purpose. It wasn't to exclude non-Jews living on the land. I do think that it's something very dangerous moving forward. And therefore, I think it's going to require a change in the American orientation to Israel. I want to say that this is also something that many American Jews are aware of. Even within Jewish American circles in the United States, there's increasing criticism of the direction that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party have taken Israel, because many American Jews feel that doesn't represent their view of Judaism. So the interesting thing, and there's an increasing number of books being published on this issue, increasing amount of research, is that it's having, in a way, a contrary effect in changing the way that Americans think about the U.S.-Israel relationship. Certainly, I think Palestinians need to be aware of that and understand how that issue plays within the United States, because obviously we as a country, it's constitutional in the United States. We take a position that there should not be state establishment of religion in that way. The founding fathers of the United States knew what was the danger and the risk of that kind of politics. And that politics of the Trump administration the politics of the Netanyahu government in Israel runs counter to centuries-old traditions in the United States. And I would encourage you to understand that really the 4 years of the Trump administration was a very unusual era in America. Obviously, it followed certain trends in American politics, but I want you to know there's a majority of Americans that understand the kind of politics that Trump was pursuing during his 4 years even undermined America, undermined what the American Constitution stands for. And obviously we saw that at the end of Trump's 4 years in office on January 6th this year, where he and his strongest supporters were encouraging people to go attack the US Capitol. And so we saw that very violent politics play out on the streets of Washington, D.C. In other words, it does have ramifications within the US. I do think it'll be very interesting to see moving forward how this issue plays both in American politics and Israeli-Palestinian politics.
My last point, Stephen, when it comes to Biden, I think, Biden administration, Joe Biden declared, I think, in the first week or in the second week of after his inauguration, Middle East is occupying low priority in his geostrategic, consideration. The first priority, goes to China, to Russia, and even in the Middle East, within the Middle East, I think he listed the files, the strategic files that he is going to deal. At the top of these files is Iran nuclear, program. Then it comes, Yemen, the conflict in Yemen. Then relations with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt, and finally, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So we are very much low in his, ladder of priorities when it comes to strategic priorities, in the Middle East. I think he wants to take more time. He is listening to his advisors. He is very much bothered about the rise of the right in Israel. Today, Benjamin Netanyahu is the most moderate leader in Israel. This is the irony. This is a big, this is a big irony. So I think, Biden is wasting, is studying. He is taking, files, out of his desk, and he is reading very much carefully. He has very good experience on the Middle East, and at the same time he is sending his hard signals to some, even to his allies. Signals to Turkey about Armenian massacre in 1914, 1915. He is sending strong signals even to Egypt about the file of human rights and the future of democracy in the Middle East. He is also sending signals to Saudi Arabia, the future of monarchy and the political behavior of the crown, Mohammed ibn Salman. I think, the U.S. Democratic administration is, listing it is a priority. They are moving, I think, moving more steadily. But my expectation, I don't think, Biden can make, a breakthrough. In the theater of Palestine, Israel. Yes, he is going to restore the diplomatic relations with the Palestinians, maybe in a few months to come, restoring, financial and economic aid, encouraging the Palestinians and the Israelis to sit again at the negotiation table. And I think he's going also to bring some other regional Arab actors into the game to convince, the Palestinians, to go again for the direct negotiation option. These are some of the points that already raised by you, Stephen, and by your students. I think we are running a bit short of time. Before I give you the floor to Stephen to close up, I would like to thank you all, Stephen, to your students, and to my students here, in Palestine. And I am sure this opportunity is huge. has opened a huge opportunity and horizon for us to continue, the discussion. I think in the future we can form a kind of, let us say, a forum, conflict resolution forum, forum where we can, encourage both students to be part of. They can, have their own, virtual space to interact, to communicate. And I am sure the feedback, given by your students and the responses by, our students can be put into a kind of, research paper. I'm very much ready and open to continue the discussion.
And I would agree, and I will speak on behalf of my students. I think they will be very interested in continuing exchanges with you all. Maybe we can set it up, as your professor was saying, in some forum where you can make it more official. But if not, then perhaps arranging to exchange email or other ways for you, because I'm sure my students will want to follow up and hear what you think about issues that occur in coming weeks and months.
And I think there is, a huge horizon for collaboration and cooperation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Enjoy, the rest of your day in Florida. And we are, preparing for our, to break the fast, in maybe in half an hour time. Thank you very much, Jamal. Shukran.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was great meeting you and having a conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Allah يعطيكم العافية. مع السلامة.
مع السلامة.
See you then. Salam.